The ceremony had been beautiful in its cruelty. Zara Thinvel stood motionless in the center of the purification chamber, her wrists bound with ceremonial silver chains that clinked softly with each breath. The walls around her gleamed with polished obsidian, carved with the sacred symbols of genetic purity that had governed Valari society for 3 millennia. High above, through the crystal dome, the twin suns of Thyros Prime cast dancing patterns of violet and gold across the chamber floor. She kept her eyes fixed on those patterns, trying to ignore the weight of 10,000 stares pressing down upon her from the viewing galleries that spiraled up the chamber's walls. Every important Valari on the planet had come to witness this moment, the first Caliph Mira discovered in 300 years, the living proof that their supposedly perfect genetic modifications could still produce abominations. Chancellor Vex Thera stood at the ceremonial podium, her own fur a pristine silver white that marked her as one of the highest genetic castes. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never questioned her place in the cosmic order. Citizens of the Empire, we gather today to witness the cleansing of our sacred bloodline. Before you stands Zara Thinvel, born of respectable lineage yet cursed with the mark of chaos. Zara's fur rippled involuntarily at the words, shifting from its current state of muted brown to flashes of brilliant green and gold. A collective intake of breath echoed through the chamber. Even bound and drugged with genetic suppressants, her body's response to stress triggered the color changes that had doomed her from birth. Let the record show, Chancellor Vextara continued, that despite extensive genetic therapy and purification treatments administered over the past 3 years, the subject continues to display chaotic pigmentation in direct violation of Imperial Genetic Code 1027. As decreed by the sacred Edict of Purity, she is hereby stripped of citizenship, family lineage, and the right to remain within the borders of the Valari Empire. The pronouncement was met with approving clicks and chirps from the assembled crowd. Zara finally raised her eyes, scanning the galleries for any face that might show sympathy or regret. She found none. Even her own parents, Councillor Thine and Lady Vel, sat rigid in their ceremonial robes, their expressions carved from stone. Her younger brother Kex refused to meet her gaze entirely. She had known this day would come. From the moment her fur first began changing colors at the age of 8, she had lived with the knowledge that her time was borrowed. The Valari prized genetic perfection above all else, and chaotic pigmentation was considered the ultimate genetic flaw, a throwback to their primitive ancestors who had lived without the rigid caste system that now defined their civilization. The transport vessel Cleansing Light awaits, Chancellor Vexthara announced. The exile will be taken to the edge of our territory and released into the void, where the cosmic order will determine her fate according to natural law. As the ceremonial guards began to escort her from the chamber, Zara caught sight of one familiar face in the crowd. Her grandmother, Elder Nixtal, sat in the family viewing section, her ancient features creased with a sorrow that threatened to break Zara's carefully maintained composure. The old Valari had been a historian before the Empire's recent purges of unnecessary knowledge, and she alone had ever suggested that Zara's condition might be something other than a curse. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Elder Nixtal pressed a small data crystal against the viewing barrier. The gesture was subtle enough that the guards didn't notice, but Zara understood. Somehow her grandmother had managed to get the crystal into the transport ship. It would be the only piece of home she would carry into exile. The journey to the transport took 2 hours through the pristine corridors of the capital city. Zara walked between 4 ceremonial guards, each wearing the deep blue robes that marked them as members of the Genetic Purity Division. Citizens they passed turned away or covered their eyes, as if looking upon her could somehow contaminate them. Children were quickly ushered into buildings or downside corridors. The Cleansing Light was smaller than she had expected, a sleek vessel designed for one purpose, removing genetic aberrations from the Empire's borders. The ship's captain, a stern Valari male with the silver-striped fur of the military caste, looked at her with the same expression he might reserve for contaminated cargo. The exile pod is equipped with basic life support for 72 hours, he informed her as they walked through the ship's narrow corridors. Navigation systems will guide you to the edge of Imperial space. Beyond that point, your survival is no longer the Empire's concern. They reached the pod bay, where a small escape vessel waited. It was barely large enough for one person, equipped with the absolute minimum needed for survival. Zara was given a standard exile kit, 3 days' worth of nutrient paste, a basic emergency shelter, and a handheld scanner for detecting potentially habitable worlds. The guards removed her ceremonial chains but immediately secured her hands with magnetic restraints. As they prepared to load her into the pod, the ship's communications officer approached the captain with a concerned expression. "Sir, we're receiving priority transmissions from 3 different Imperial vessels. They're requesting permission to board and examine the exile." The captain's fur bristled with irritation. "What's the nature of these requests?" "Scientific study, sir. Apparently word of her condition has reached the Imperial Academy. They want to conduct genetic analysis before exile." Zara felt her stomach drop. If the Academy got hold of her, exile would become the least of her concerns. The Imperial scientists were notorious for their invasive research methods, and a living Caliph Mira would represent an unprecedented opportunity to study the genetic mechanisms behind chaotic pigmentation. The captain considered for a moment and shook his head. The exile order came directly from the Chancellor's office. "I'm not authorized to delay it for scientific convenience. Tell the Academy ships they can submit a formal request for genetic samples, but the exile proceeds as scheduled." Relief flooded through Zara's body, causing her fur to shift to deep blue and silver patterns that spiraled across her arms and shoulders. The guards stepped back instinctively as if her color changes were contagious. "Get her in the pod," the captain ordered. "I want her out of Imperial space before those Academy ships decide to override my authority." The pod's interior was cramped but functional. A single seat faced a small viewport with basic controls and life support systems within reach. As they secured her inside, one of the guards activated a hidden compartment and placed Elder Nixtal's data crystal inside, a small kindness that suggested not every Valeri had completely abandoned their compassion. "The pod's navigation system is programmed to take you to the neutral zone," the guard explained quietly. "Beyond that, you're on your own. The emergency beacon will activate if your life support fails," but he trailed off, both of them knowing that no Imperial vessel would respond to such a signal. The pod bay doors began to open, revealing the starfield beyond. Zara looked out at the vast darkness, wondering if any of those distant points of light harbored worlds where she might find refuge. The Valari Empire controlled 300 systems, but the galaxy contained billions of stars. Somewhere out there, perhaps, was a place where the color of her fur wouldn't determine her right to exist. The launch sequence initiated with a soft hum of machinery. Through the pod's communications system, she could hear the captain making his final log entry. Exile pod launched at 1347 Imperial Standard Time. Subject expelled from Imperial space as ordered. May the cosmic order determine her fate according to natural law. The pod's thrusters fired, pushing her away from the cleansing light and toward the edge of the only civilization she had ever known. As Thyrus Prime shrank behind her, Zara activated Elder Nixtal's data crystal and inserted it into the pod's navigation computer. The crystal contained more than she had expected. Along with the family photos and her grandmother's recorded message, there was a vast archive of pre-Empire Valari history, information that had supposedly been destroyed during the Great Cleansing. Maps of ancient Valari settlements, genetic records from before the modification programs began, and most shocking of all, historical documents suggesting that chaotic pigmentation had once been considered a mark of spiritual power among their ancestors. One file in particular caught her attention, a star chart marking the locations of Valari colonies that had rejected the Empire's genetic modification programs. According to her grandmother's notes, these colonies had been officially declared extinct, but the chart suggested that at least some might have survived in hidden regions of space. But first, she would have to survive the journey. The pod's navigation system was already plotting a course toward the neutral zone, using gravitational slingshots around dead stars to conserve fuel. The estimated travel time to the edge of Imperial space was 18 days, far longer than her 72 hours of life support could sustain her. Zara began examining the pod's systems more carefully, using skills she had developed during her years of genetic research. The life support recycler was operating at only 60% efficiency, and the food synthesis unit was offline entirely. She would have to find a way to repair or replace these systems if she hoped to survive long enough to reach safety. As she worked, her fur gradually shifted to the deep purple and gold patterns that had always appeared when she was concentrating deeply. In the Empire, such displays had been seen as evidence of her instability. Now, alone in the vast darkness between stars, they were simply part of who she was. Hours passed as she modified the pod's systems, rerouting power from non-essential functions to extend the life support duration. She managed to increase her survival window to 10 days. Still not enough to reach the neutral zone, but perhaps long enough to find another solution. The pod's long-range sensors detected something unexpected, a small spatial anomaly roughly 6 days ahead of her current trajectory. The readings were unclear, but it appeared to be some kind of artificial structure, possibly a space station or abandoned research facility. It was in the direction of a star system that didn't appear on any Imperial charts she had access to. Zara adjusted her course slightly to intercept the anomaly, knowing it might be her only chance of survival. As she made the navigation adjustments, she noticed something strange about the stellar coordinates. According to her grandmother's hidden archives, this was the location of an ancient Valari listening post that had been established centuries ago to monitor signals from primitive civilizations. The listening post was supposed to be abandoned, but if it still had basic life support or manufacturing capabilities, it might provide the resources she needed to extend her journey. More intriguingly, the post's original mission had been to study a young civilization that had developed in the nearby system, a species that the ancient Valari had found fascinating for their extreme diversity and rapid technological advancement. The files referred to them simply as the Builders of the Blue World, but provided little additional detail about their capabilities or current status. According to the timestamps, the last data transmission from the listening post had been over 400 years ago, shortly before the Great Cleansing that had transformed Valari's society. As Zara settled in for the 6-day journey to the listening post, she reviewed more of her grandmother's hidden archives. The deeper she delved into pre-Empire history, the more questions arose about the official narrative she had been taught. The genetic modification programs that had created their rigid caste system had apparently been implemented not to improve their species, but to prepare for some kind of conflict that was only vaguely referenced in the surviving records. One document fragment mentioned the Great Diversity as a threat to Valari expansion, suggesting that their empire had encountered another civilization whose genetic variety posed some kind of strategic challenge. The modifications that had eliminated chaotic pigmentation had also apparently eliminated other traits that their ancestors had valued: creativity, adaptability, and the ability to form emotional bonds across genetic lines. The irony was profound. Zara had been exiled for displaying the very traits that had once made her people strong enough to reach the stars. Her chaotic pigmentation wasn't a genetic flaw, it was a throwback to what the Valari had been before they had traded their diversity for conformity. On the 4th day of her journey, the pod's sensors detected something that changed everything. Artificial signals coming from the direction of the blue world the ancient files had mentioned. The transmissions were incredibly complex, containing mathematical patterns and information structures that suggested a technological civilization far more advanced than the primitive society the Valari had observed centuries ago. More shocking still, some of the signals appeared to be responding to her pod's presence. Whatever civilization inhabited that system was not only aware of her approach, they were trying to communicate with her. The mathematical sequences grew more complex each day, as if they were attempting to establish a foundation for meaningful exchange. Zara began responding with her own mathematical patterns, using the pod's communications array to send sequences based on Valari number theory. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Complex mathematical proofs that demonstrated not only intelligence but a deep understanding of universal physical constants that paralleled Valari's scientific knowledge. As she approached the listening post, the abandoned station suddenly powered up its beacon systems, as if activated by some external command. Someone, or something, was guiding her toward a safe harbor. The Blue World civilization wasn't just aware of her presence. They were actively helping her survive. For the first time since her exile began, Zara allowed herself to hope that her journey might lead to something other than lonely death in the void between stars. The ancient Valari listening post emerged from the darkness like a ghost ship returning from the depths of space. Its crystalline structures, once pristine and gleaming, now bore the scars of centuries of cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. Yet despite its aged appearance, power was flowing through its systems, and docking lights blinked in sequence to guide Zara's pod toward a functional airlock. As her small vessel connected to the station, Zara felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity taking hold. The pod's sensors confirmed that the station's atmosphere was breathable, though stale and thin from centuries of minimal maintenance. She gathered her few possessions, including her grandmother's data crystal, and cycled through the airlock into what had once been the monitoring station's command center. The chamber was vast by pod standards, but cramped compared to the grand halls of Thyros Prime. Banks of ancient monitoring equipment lined the walls, their displays showing star charts and data streams that hadn't been updated in 4 centuries. Dust motes danced in the artificial lighting, and the air carried the metallic scent of old technology and recycled atmosphere. What captured Zara's attention immediately was the central display screen, which was very much active and showing real-time data. The system was tracking her escape pod's approach, but more importantly, it was displaying ongoing communications with the civilization in the nearby Blue World system. Someone had been using this abandoned station as a relay point for interstellar communication. She approached the main console cautiously, her first shifting to pale gold and silver patterns as she concentrated on deciphering the ancient Valari interface. Many of the controls were familiar despite their age, based on standardized designs that had remained consistent across their civilization. As she accessed the station's logs, she discovered something that made her heart race. The station wasn't abandoned. It was being maintained by an artificial intelligence that had been operating autonomously for the past 4 centuries, continuing its original mission to monitor and communicate with the Blue World civilization. More shocking still, the AI had been in active contact with representatives from that world for over a decade. "Greetings, Zara Zeinviel of the House of Vel," a voice spoke from the station's communication system. The words were in perfect Valari, but the accent was unlike anything she had ever heard, formal and precise, yet somehow warmer than the clipped tones of Imperial Standard. "Who are you?" she asked aloud, looking around the chamber for any sign of another presence. "I am Station Intelligence 77401, designated as Monitor by the builders of the Blue World. I have been maintaining this facility and serving as a communication relay between your people and theirs since Imperial Year 2847. I have been expecting your arrival." Zara's fur shifted to deep blue patterns of confusion and alarm. "Expecting me? How could you possibly know I was coming?" The humans of the Blue World possess remarkable predictive capabilities when it comes to social dynamics. They calculated a high probability that the Valari Empire would eventually produce an individual whose genetic expression violated Imperial genetic codes, and that such an individual would likely be exiled along one of several probable routes. This station lies along the most direct path from Thyros Prime to the neutral zone. "Humans," she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. "That's what they call themselves?" "Indeed. They are a fascinating species, though, quite different from your people in fundamental ways. Where the Velari value genetic consistency and social order, humans celebrate genetic diversity and individual expression. Where your empire seeks to eliminate variations from established norms, human civilization actively cultivates and protects differences." The AI paused, and Zara could hear the subtle hum of processing systems. "They have specifically requested permission to offer you sanctuary should you be willing to accept it." The offer was so unexpected that Zara's fur cycled rapidly through half a dozen color patterns before settling into the chaotic rainbow display that had marked her as cursed from birth. "Sanctuary? But they don't even know me." "Why would they—" "They know more about you than you might expect," Monitor interrupted gently. "Human intelligence gathering capabilities are quite sophisticated, and they have been monitoring Valari society for some time. They are aware of your genetic research, your historical studies, and your treatment at the hands of the Imperial authorities. More importantly, they understand what your existence represents." "Which is what, exactly?" "Proof that the Valari genetic modification programs were not as complete or permanent as your empire claims. You are not an aberration, Zara Thinvel. You are evidence that your people's original genetic diversity still exists beneath the artificial constraints imposed by the Great Cleansing. The humans believe this has significant implications for the future of both our species." Monitor began displaying data on the central screen, star charts showing the location of the human home system, basic information about their civilization, and, most importantly, technical specifications for a journey to their world. The trip would take approximately 3 weeks using the station's own long-range communication relay to coordinate with human vessels that could provide assistance along the route. "I should warn you," Monitor continued, "that accepting their offer would mean more than simple exile from Valari space. The humans are actively opposed to the Empire's expansion policies and genetic purity doctrines. By seeking sanctuary with them, you would be choosing sides in a conflict that most Valari don't even know exists." Zara studied the data streams flowing across the display, trying to process the implications of what she was learning. What kind of conflict? The humans referred to it as philosophical incompatibility. Their civilization is built on principles that are antithetical to everything the Valari Empire represents. They believe in genetic diversity, individual freedom, and cultural adaptation rather than conquest and conversion. They have been quietly supporting resistance movements throughout Imperial space for the past century. The revelation hit Zara like a physical blow. Everything she had been taught about the galaxy beyond Imperial borders was apparently false. Far from being primitive or chaotic, the human civilization appeared to be sophisticated enough to conduct covert operations across hundreds of star systems without the Empire's knowledge. "Show me more about them," she requested, settling into one of the station's command chairs. Monitor complied, activating displays throughout the chamber. Images appeared showing human cities that defied every architectural principle Zara had been taught. Where Valari construction emphasized uniformity and geometric perfection, human buildings seemed to grow organically, incorporating elements from dozens of different aesthetic traditions. The cities themselves were chaotic riots of color and form that should have been visually jarring but somehow worked together in harmony. More stunning were the images of humans themselves. Their genetic diversity was staggering. Skin colors ranging from pale cream to deep brown, hair that could be straight or curled, eyes of every possible shade. Some appeared to have incorporated technological modifications, while others seemed entirely natural, yet they all moved together through their cities as if their differences were completely normal and accepted. "They have no genetic caste system?" Zara asked, fascinated despite herself. "None whatsoever. Human social organization is based on individual merit, personal choice, and voluntary association rather than genetic inheritance. They find the concept of genetic-based hierarchy morally reprehensible. But how do they maintain social order? How do they prevent chaos and conflict?" "They don't prevent conflict," Monitor explained. "They channel it productively. Human civilization thrives on the creative tension that emerges from diversity. They've learned to transform disagreement into innovation and opposition into progress. It is a fundamentally different approach to social organization than anything the Valari Empire has ever attempted." As Zara absorbed this information, new data streams began appearing on the displays. These showed not images but behavioral analyses, cultural studies, and technological assessments that painted a picture of a civilization that was not only different from the Empire, but potentially superior in many ways. Human technological development had followed paths that Valari science had never explored. Where the Empire focused on perfecting existing knowledge, humans actively sought out new possibilities. Where Valari research aimed for standardization and control, human innovation embraced experimentation and adaptation. "They want to meet me," Zara said, understanding flooding through her. "Not just to offer sanctuary, but to learn from me." "Correct. You represent something they value highly, evidence that rigid systems can be overcome, that diversity can reassert itself even after centuries of suppression. To them, you are not a genetic aberration, but a sign of hope." Monitor displayed a new set of technical specifications, plans for modifying one of the station's communication relays to serve as a beacon that would guide human rescue vessels to this location. The modification would take approximately 6 hours to complete and would require Zara's assistance in accessing certain secure systems that needed genetic identification from a Valari citizen. "There is one additional consideration," Monitor added as Zara studied the modification plans. "The human representative who has volunteered to make contact with you is someone they consider particularly qualified for first contact situations. His name is Marcus Chen, and he has extensive experience in interspecies communication and cultural adaptation." "What makes him qualified?" "According to human records, Marcus Chen has successfully established peaceful contact with 17 different alien civilizations over the past decade. He specializes in situations where genetic or cultural differences might create barriers to understanding. More importantly, he has specifically requested this assignment after reviewing all available data about your situation." Monitor paused again, processing systems humming. "The humans describe him as someone who sees beauty in difference rather than threat. They believe he will be able to appreciate your unique characteristics rather than fear them." Zara's fur shifted through complex patterns as she considered her options. Returning to Imperial space was impossible. Even if she could find a way back, she would face immediate execution or worse. Continuing her journey to the neutral zone would likely result in death from resource depletion. But accepting the humans' offer meant stepping into completely unknown territory, trusting her life to aliens whose motivations she couldn't fully understand. "What do you recommend?" she asked Monitor. "I am programmed to prioritize Valari welfare," the AI replied. "However, my observations over the past 4 centuries suggest that the human approach to civilization may be more sustainable and beneficial than the Imperial model. More importantly, they offer you something the Empire never could, the possibility of being valued for what you are rather than condemned for what you're not." The choice, when she examined it logically, wasn't really a choice at all. She could die alone in space maintaining her loyalty to a civilization that had rejected her, or she could take a chance on aliens who seemed to find value in the very traits that made her an outcast. "How do we contact them?" she asked. Monitor immediately began implementing the beacon modifications, displaying step-by-step instructions for the genetic locks that required Zara's direct involvement. As they worked together over the next several hours, the AI shared more details about human civilization and the specific individual who would be coming to meet her. Marcus Chen was described as a xenobiologist and cultural liaison who had spent most of his adult life working at the boundaries between different species and civilizations. His specialty was finding common ground between radically different forms of life, and his success rate in establishing peaceful first contact was apparently unprecedented in human history. He has requested permission to approach the station alone, Monitor explained as they completed the final beacon calibrations. Human protocols normally require diplomatic teams for first contact situations, but he believes a single individual will be less threatening and more conducive to building trust. When will he arrive? His vessel is small but highly advanced, designed for long-range exploration and equipped with universal translation protocols and cultural databases. He has spent the past week in preparation, studying Valari language, history, and social customs. The beacon activated with a soft harmonic resonance that seemed to fill the entire station. According to the displays, the signal was being received and acknowledged by human vessels throughout their local space. The rescue mission was now officially underway. As they waited for Marcus Chen's arrival, Zara explored more of the station's archives and discovered something that changed her understanding of her own situation entirely. The ancient monitoring logs contained detailed genetic analyses of the Valari populations that had existed before the Great Cleansing, and those analyses revealed a shocking truth. Chaotic pigmentation hadn't been rare among her ancestors. It had been the norm. The rigid color patterns that now defined imperial caste systems were the aberration, the result of genetic modifications that had artificially suppressed the natural diversity that had once characterized her species. She wasn't a throwback or a mutation. She was what the Valari had been before they had traded their diversity for the illusion of perfection. The implications were staggering. If she could prove this to others, if she could somehow share this information with the hidden colonies her grandmother had mentioned, it could undermine the entire genetic hierarchy that supported imperial authority. But first, she would have to survive long enough to make contact with this human named Marcus Chen, who apparently saw beauty where her own people saw only chaos. As the hours passed and his arrival grew closer, Zara found herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with her fur patterns. For the first time in her life, she was about to meet someone who might look upon her shifting colors not with disgust or fear, but with wonder and appreciation. The very thought sent cascades of new patterns across her skin. Brilliant golds and deep purples that would have been considered deeply inappropriate in imperial society, but which she now understood were simply expressions of who she truly was. Marcus Chen's ship appeared on the station's sensors exactly when Monitor had predicted, emerging from faster-than-light transit with the graceful efficiency of advanced human technology. The vessel was unlike anything in Zara's experience. Sleek where Valari ships were angular, curved where Imperial designs were sharp and somehow organic in appearance despite being clearly artificial. Harmony's voice requesting permission to dock, came a transmission in accented but grammatically perfect Valari. The voice was warm and patient, carrying none of the authoritative tones that characterized Imperial communications. "I am Marcus Chen, cultural liaison of the Terran Federation. I'm honored to meet you, Zara Theinvel." Zara's fur shifted nervously through patterns of blue and silver as she activated the communication system. Permission granted. The docking bay is pressurized and ready. Her own voice sounded strange to her. Less formal than she had intended, more uncertain than she wanted to admit. Through the station's external cameras, she watched as Marcus Chen's ship approached with careful precision. The vessel was smaller than she had expected, designed for a crew of perhaps 3 or 4 individuals rather than the massive ships the Empire used for interstellar travel. Yet its technology was clearly sophisticated. She could see advanced sensor arrays and what appeared to be defensive systems that might rival anything in the Imperial fleet. The docking process completed with barely a vibration through the station's structure. Zara positioned herself in the main receiving bay, trying to project calm confidence while her fur betrayed her emotional state with cascading patterns of anticipation and nervousness. She had never met an alien before. The Empire's policy of genetic purity extended to avoiding contact with other species whenever possible. The airlock cycled and Marcus Chen stepped into the chamber. Zara's first impression was of overwhelming difference. Marcus was tall by Valari standards, perhaps 6.5 feet in height, with a broader build that seemed characteristic of his species. His skin was a warm brown that reminded her of polished wood, and his hair was dark with traces of silver that suggested advanced age, despite his apparently vigorous health. But what struck her most profoundly were his eyes, deep brown and intelligent, and when they met hers, they held no trace of the disgust or fear she had learned to expect. Instead, Marcus Chen looked at her with what could only be described as wonder. "You're beautiful," he said softly in Valari, the words carrying such genuine appreciation that Zara's fur immediately blazed into the full chaotic display that had marked her as cursed. Brilliant emerald greens flowed into deep golden yellows, which shifted to rich purples and midnight blues, the pattern swirling across her entire body in response to emotional intensity. Marcus's expression became even more amazed.
Incredible.
Monitor's descriptions didn't do you justice. Your fur responds to emotional states? It's a curse, Zara replied automatically, then stopped herself. The word felt wrong in this context. I mean, yes, it changes color involuntarily. I cannot control it. Why would you want to? Marcus approached slowly, his movements non-threatening but clearly fascinated. It's like watching living art. Every emotion creates new patterns, new combinations. Your people consider this a flaw? The Empire values genetic consistency. Chaotic pigmentation is considered evidence of genetic instability. Zara found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Marcus's reaction was so completely opposite to everything she had experienced that she was beginning to question her fundamental assumptions about her own nature. Genetic instability, Marcus repeated, shaking his head. What we would call genetic diversity. The foundation of evolutionary success. He gestured toward a seating area that Monitor had prepared. May we talk? I have so many questions, and I imagine you have even more. They settled into chairs facing each other, and Zara got her first opportunity to study a human at close range. Marcus's features were mobile and expressive in ways that Valari faces weren't. His eyebrows moved to emphasize points, his mouth curved into smiles that seemed to engage his entire face, and his eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that suggested frequent humor. Everything about him seemed dynamic and changeable, much like her own shifting fur patterns. Monitor has been telling me about your civilization, Zara began. It seems very different from what we've been taught about other species. What have you been taught? Marcus asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. That other species are primitive and chaotic, that they lack the discipline for true civilization, that genetic diversity leads to social collapse and territorial warfare. She paused, studying his reaction. Based on what I've seen of your technology and social organization, those teachings appear to be inaccurate. Marcus smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. Wildly inaccurate, I'd say, though I understand why your empire would promote such beliefs. It's much easier to justify conquest and genetic modification if you believe you're bringing order to chaos. Conquest? The word sent Zara's fur into darker patterns. The Empire doesn't engage in conquest. We offer civilization and improvement to primitive species. And what happens to those species after they receive these improvements? Zara opened her mouth to repeat the standard Imperial answer, then stopped. She had never actually researched what happened to species that underwent Imperial improvement. Such information was classified above her clearance level, filed under military rather than scientific records. You don't know, do you? Marcus said gently. That's not unusual. Most Imperial citizens aren't given access to information about your government's expansion policies. Tell me, she said, her fur shifting to deep purple patterns that she recognized as her concentration colors. Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. In the past 3 centuries, the Valari Empire has made contact with 47 different species. Of those, 42 have undergone genetic modification programs similar to what was done to your own people. The modifications eliminate what your scientists call chaotic traits, genetic diversity, emotional variability, cultural creativity, and individual initiative. And the 5 species that didn't undergo modification? They resisted. 3 of them were declared genetically incompatible and were sterilized through targeted biological weapons. 2 others fled to regions beyond Imperial reach and are now considered extinct by your government. The information hit Zara like a physical blow. Her fur cycled rapidly through patterns of shock, denial, and growing horror as the implications sank in. You're saying the Empire commits genocide. Selective genocide, Marcus corrected. They don't eliminate entire species, they eliminate diversity within species. Everyone who survives the process becomes genetically and culturally similar to Imperial norms. The end result is the same, the destruction of everything that made those civilizations unique. Zara found herself struggling to process this revelation. Everything she had believed about her civilization, about the benevolent nature of Imperial expansion, was apparently a lie. The genetic modifications that had been presented as improvements were actually weapons designed to eliminate the very traits that made civilization strong and adaptable. Is that why you offered me sanctuary? She asked. Because I represent resistance to this process? Partly, Marcus admitted. But mostly because you're a person in need of help, and our civilization believes in helping people when we can. The political implications are secondary to basic humanitarian concerns. Humanitarian? A human concept that translates roughly as the ethical obligation to preserve and protect intelligent life. We believe that diversity, genetic, cultural, individual, is inherently valuable and should be protected whenever possible. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. But I won't lie to you about the larger situation. Your existence does represent something important to us. You're proof that the Imperial genetic modifications aren't permanent, that the original Villari genetic template still exists and can reassert itself. If we could find others like you, or help your people understand what they've lost, you could start a revolution, Zara finished. We could offer them a choice. The same choice we're offering you. Zara's fur had settled into the chaotic rainbow pattern that appeared when she was processing complex emotional states. What exactly are you offering? Sanctuary on Earth, our home world, with full citizenship and protection under our laws? Access to our educational systems, research facilities, and cultural resources. The opportunity to study your own people's history and genetics without Imperial interference? Marcus paused. And if you're interested, the chance to help us contact other Villari who might be questioning Imperial doctrine. In exchange for what? Nothing, Marcus said simply. We don't believe in conditional sanctuary. If you come to Earth, you're free to live your life however you choose. We'd appreciate any insights you could share about Imperial society, and we'd love to learn about your research and abilities, but your cooperation would be entirely voluntary. The offer was so generous that Zara found herself suspicious. In Imperial society, nothing was ever given freely. Every transaction involved obligations and expectations. There must be something you want from me. Marcus smiled again, and this time the expression seemed tinged with sadness. The hardest thing for most Imperial refugees to understand is that we really don't want anything from you except the opportunity to know you as a person. Your value to us isn't based on what you can do for our civilization, it's based on who you are. I don't understand. In human culture, diversity isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated. Your chaotic pigmentation wouldn't mark you as defective or unstable. It would mark you as unique and beautiful. Your research abilities and historical knowledge wouldn't be seen as useful tools. They would be seen as expressions of your individual talents and interests. Marcus leaned forward again, his brown eyes intense with sincerity. Zara, you've spent your entire life being told that you're flawed because you're different. What if I told you that being different is exactly what makes you valuable? For the first time since her exile began, Zara felt something that might have been hope. Her fur responded with patterns she had never seen before, soft golds and warm blues that seemed to flow together in harmony rather than chaos. You really mean that? I really do. And so does everyone else on Earth who has been following your situation. We have an entire community of beings from different worlds who have found refuge with us. Some are genetic variants like yourself. Others are cultural dissidents. Still others are survivors of Imperial improvement programs who managed to escape. There are others like me. There are others who have faced similar situations for similar reasons. Each person's story is unique, but the underlying theme is the same. People who were rejected by rigid systems for being who they naturally are. Monitor's voice interrupted their conversation. Marcus Chen, I have received a priority transmission from Terran Federation Command. There appears to be unusual activity in nearby Imperial space. Marcus immediately stood, his relaxed demeanor shifting to alert professionalism. What kind of activity? 3 Imperial Academy vessels have been detected approaching the system. They appear to be conducting a systematic search of this region, possibly seeking the listening post. Zara felt her fur shift to the dark patterns that indicated fear. They're looking for me. The Academy wanted to conduct research before my exile was completed. How long before they reach us? Marcus asked Monitor. Approximately 14 hours, assuming they maintain current search patterns and velocity. Marcus turned back to Zara, his expression serious but not panicked. We need to leave. Now. My ship can reach Earth safely, but we need to depart before those Imperial vessels detect this station. Zara looked around the chamber where she had spent the past day learning about possibilities she had never imagined. What about Monitor? What about the station? I am programmed with advanced self-destruct protocols, Monitor replied. If Imperial forces attempt to access my memory banks, I will eliminate all evidence of human contact and communication. The station itself will appear to have been abandoned for centuries. You'll destroy yourself to protect us? I will execute my primary directive, protecting the interest of the Valari people. Based on my observations, those interests now align with preventing Imperial forces from obtaining information about human civilization or your current location. AI paused, then added with what almost sounded like warmth, "It has been an honor to meet you, Zara Theinvel. I believe you will find human civilization far more welcoming than the one that rejected you." Zara gathered her few belongings, including her grandmother's data crystal, while Marcus prepared his ship for immediate departure. As they moved through the docking bay, she took one last look at the ancient station that had served as a bridge between her old life and whatever lay ahead. "Ready?" Marcus asked as they reached his ship's airlock. Zara's first shifted through one final cascade of chaotic patterns. Fear and anticipation, sorrow and hope, all blending together in colors that had no names in any language she knew. "I'm ready." As they boarded Harmony's voice and prepared for the journey to Earth, Zara realized that for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own destiny rather than having it imposed upon her. The thought sent new patterns racing across her fur, patterns that looked remarkably like freedom. The journey to Earth took 12 days through regions of space that existed far beyond any Imperial star charts. Marcus's ship, Harmony's voice, moved through hyperspace with technology that seemed almost organic in its smooth efficiency. Unlike Valari vessels, which announced their presence with rigid geometric designs and aggressive sensor sweeps, the human ship appeared designed to blend harmoniously with its environment. During the voyage, Zara learned more about human civilization than she had ever imagined possible. Marcus proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with her questions, and willing to explain concepts that challenged everything she had been taught about social organization and species development. The ship's library contained databases covering thousands of years of human history, and what Zara discovered there fundamentally altered her understanding of what intelligent civilizations could achieve. Humans had apparently evolved from a chaotic mix of tribal societies, ethnic groups, and competing cultures, yet somehow they had managed to unite their world without eliminating their diversity. "It wasn't easy," Marcus explained as they reviewed historical records together. "We had thousands of years of warfare, oppression, and cultural conflicts. But eventually we learned that our differences were strengths rather than weaknesses. The diversity that had caused conflict also provided the creativity and adaptability we needed to solve complex problems." Zara studied images of human cities where architectural styles from dozens of different cultural traditions coexisted in apparent harmony. "How do you prevent chaos? How do you maintain order when everyone is different?" "We don't maintain order," Marcus replied with a smile. "We maintain balance. Order implies control and conformity. Balance means finding ways for different elements to work together productively. But surely there must be some form of central authority? Some way of ensuring that individual differences don't threaten the greater good?" Marcus laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine rather than mocking. "You're thinking like a Valari. We do have governments and laws, but they're designed to protect diversity rather than eliminate it. Our highest legal principles are based on the idea that individual freedom and cultural expression are fundamental rights that can only be restricted when they directly harm others." The concept was so foreign to Zara's experience that it took days for her to begin understanding its implications. In Imperial society, individual desires were subordinated to genetic caste requirements and social utility. The idea that personal freedom could be considered more important than social conformity was almost incomprehensible. As they traveled deeper into human space, they began encountering other vessels that reinforced Marcus's explanations. The ships they passed showed incredible variety in design, from sleek exploration craft to massive cargo haulers that appeared to have been constructed by combining technology from multiple different civilizations. Some vessels even carried markings that indicated crews comprising different alien species working together. "How many different species live in human territory?" Zara asked, as they passed a trading convoy that included at least 3 distinct ship designs. "Currently, about 250 species maintain permanent populations on human worlds," Marcus replied. "Another 700 or so have established diplomatic relations and regular trade partnerships. We found that diversity of perspective leads to better solutions for complex problems." "And none of them undergo genetic modification to fit human standards?" "Genetic modification is available for medical purposes, but it's strictly voluntary and usually limited to correcting genetic disorders or adapting to different environmental conditions. The idea of modifying an entire species to fit predetermined standards is considered a form of genocide." On the 8th day of their journey, they were joined by an escort convoy of 3 human vessels that would guide them through the outer systems of Earth's solar system. The formation was clearly defensive, but Marcus explained that the precautions were routine for any ship carrying refugees from Imperial space. The Empire has occasionally sent infiltration teams disguised as refugees, he said when Zara asked about the security measures. We've learned to be careful without being paranoid. The escort ships were unlike anything in Zara's experience. Where Imperial vessels projected aggressive capability, these human ships seemed designed to project protective strength. Their weapon systems were clearly formidable, but they were integrated into designs that emphasized rescue and assistance capabilities rather than conquest. Those are Guardian-class vessels, Marcus explained. Their primary mission is search and rescue operations in hostile space. They've pulled refugees out of more Imperial systems than any other ship class in our fleet. As they approached Earth's solar system, Zara got her first glimpse of what a truly diverse civilization could accomplish. The system was alive with activity. Space stations that served as diplomatic centers for dozens of different species, research facilities where humans and aliens worked together on projects that spanned multiple scientific disciplines, and manufacturing complexes that produced goods using technologies that no single species could have developed alone. "Welcome to Sol," Marcus said as Earth appeared on the ship's main viewer, "our home system." The planet that appeared before them was exactly as beautiful as its name suggested. Swirling white clouds covered oceans of deep blue, while continents showed the green and brown patterns of thriving ecosystems. But what struck Zara most profoundly was the evidence of conscious diversity even from space. The orbital installations around Earth showed architectural influences from dozens of different worlds, creating a harmony of styles that should have been chaotic but instead appeared magnificent. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her fur shifting to soft patterns of awe and wonder. "Wait until you see it from the surface," Marcus replied. "Each region has developed its own character based on the species and cultures that have settled there. But first, we need to complete your immigration processing." The immigration station was a massive structure positioned at one of Earth's Lagrange points, designed to handle the constant flow of new arrivals from across human space and beyond. As they docked, Zara could see ships from what appeared to be dozens of different civilizations, each carrying beings seeking new homes or opportunities in human territory. The processing center itself was a revelation. Instead of the sterile efficiency she would have expected in Imperial facilities, the human installation was clearly designed for comfort and accessibility. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate beings of different physical configurations, the lighting was adjustable for species with different optical sensitivities, and the atmosphere could be modified for different respiratory requirements. "Zara Thinvel," the immigration officer said when they reached the processing counter. The speaker was human, but had clearly been modified for enhanced longevity. Her apparent age suggested centuries of experience, yet she moved with the vigor of someone much younger.
I'm Director Sarah Kim.
"We've been expecting you." The director's manner was professional but warm, and she spoke Valari with an accent that suggested extensive linguistic training. "Before we begin the formal process, I want you to know that you have several options for your residency status. You can apply for standard refugee protection, full citizenship, or temporary sanctuary while you decide what you want to do long-term." "What are the differences?" Zara asked. "Refugee protection provides immediate safety and basic support services while you adjust to life here. Citizenship offers full participation in human society, with voting rights and civic responsibilities. Temporary sanctuary gives you time to explore your options without making permanent commitments." The very existence of such choices was overwhelming to someone from Imperial society. "What do most people choose?" "It varies," Director Kim replied. "Some beings know immediately that they want to become full citizens. Others need time to heal from whatever they've escaped before making major decisions. There's no wrong choice, and you can always change your status later if your circumstances or desires change." As they worked through the immigration forms, Zara learned more about the practical aspects of life in human society. Education was freely available to anyone who wanted it, in formats adapted for different species and learning styles. Employment was based on individual interests and abilities rather than genetic caste. Housing was provided based on need and preference rather than social rank. "The hardest adjustment for most Imperial refugees is learning to make choices," Director Kim explained. "When you've lived your entire life having your path determined by genetic classification, suddenly having unlimited options can be overwhelming." "What kind of work do people from the Empire usually do here?" Zara asked. "Whatever interests them. We have former Imperial citizens working as artists, scientists, engineers, teachers, merchants, explorers, anything you can imagine. Your genetic research background would be valuable in dozens of fields, but you're free to pursue completely different interests if you prefer." After several hours of processing, Zara's temporary sanctuary status was approved. She was assigned a cultural liaison who would help her adjust to human society, provided with basic living accommodations, and given access to educational resources that would help her understand her new environment. But most importantly, she was given something she had never possessed in Imperial society: legal recognition as an individual with inherent rights that couldn't be taken away because of her genetic characteristics. "One more thing," Director Kim said as they completed the paperwork. "We have a residential community specifically for beings who have escaped Imperial genetic modification programs. It's not segregated housing. You're free to live anywhere you choose, but many people find it helpful to be around others who understand their experiences." "How many people live there?" Zara asked. "Currently about 3,000, representing 47 different species that have undergone Imperial modification. It's become quite a remarkable community. They've developed new forms of art, music, and literature that celebrate the diversity the Empire tried to eliminate. The shuttle flight to Earth's surface took 2 hours, descending through atmosphere that felt completely different from anything Zara had experienced on Volari worlds. The air was rich with moisture and carried scents that spoke of living ecosystems rather than controlled environments. As they approached the landing pad, she could see forests that grew in apparently random patterns rather than organized groves, and cities that seemed to have evolved organically rather than being planned according to rigid principles. Marcus had arranged for them to visit the refugee community first, giving Zara a chance to meet others who had made similar journeys from Imperial space. The residential area was located in a region that humans called the Pacific Northwest, characterized by tall trees, frequent rain, and landscapes that changed dramatically with the seasons. "Most of the residents chose this location because it reminded them of worlds they had lost," Marcus explained as their transport approached the community center. "The constantly changing weather patterns and diverse ecosystems provide a sense of natural chaos that many find comforting after years of Imperial order. The community center was a building that perfectly embodied the principles Zara had been learning about. Architectural elements from dozens of different worlds had been combined into a structure that was both functional and beautiful, with no single aesthetic dominating the design. Gardens surrounding the building contained plants from across the galaxy, creating ecosystems that shouldn't have been possible but somehow thrived in their diversity. As they entered the building, Zara encountered the most diverse gathering of intelligent beings she had ever seen. The main hall contained individuals from species she couldn't identify, each displaying characteristics that would have marked them as genetic aberrants in Imperial space. Some had fur that changed color like her own, others showed physical variations that suggested adaptation to different environments, and still others displayed behavioral patterns that indicated creative or emotional expression beyond Imperial norms. "Welcome to Earth," said a being that appeared to be from a species related to the Volari but with significant genetic differences. Her fur was a deep blue black with silver patterns that seemed to shift in response to her mood, and her features showed the pointed ears and elongated limbs that characterized the ancient Volari genetic template. "I'm Lyra Chantel, originally from the Outer Rim colonies. I've been here for 15 years. 15 years? Zara was shocked by the time frame. "You've been away from Imperial space for 15 years? "Longer, actually. I spent 3 years in hiding in the neutral zone before human rescue vessels found me. Coming here was the best decision I ever made." Lyra gestured around the hall, where beings from dozens of species were engaged in animated conversations, artistic activities, and what appeared to be collaborative research projects. "What do you do here?" Zara asked. "Whatever I choose," Lyra replied with a smile. "I'm currently working on a project to document the genetic diversity that existed in our species before the Great Cleansing. It turns out there are colonies throughout this region of space where Volari escaped the Empire's modification programs, and they've preserved genetic templates that Imperial science considers extinct." The implications hit Zara immediately. "You mean there are still Volari who have chaotic pigmentation?" "Not just chaotic pigmentation. All of the traits the Empire eliminated. Emotional sensitivity, creative expression, genetic adaptability. There are entire worlds of our people who never underwent modification, and they've developed societies that would be completely unrecognizable to Imperial citizens." As Zara spent the afternoon meeting other community members and learning about their experiences, she began to understand that her exile from the Empire wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The traits that had made her an outcast in Imperial society were not only normal here, they were valued and celebrated. More importantly, she wasn't alone. There were others like her throughout the galaxy, beings who had preserved or rediscovered the diversity that rigid civilizations tried to eliminate. And now she had the opportunity to connect with them, to learn from them, and perhaps to help others make the journey from conformity to freedom. As the day ended and Marcus prepared to show her to her new living quarters, Zara realized that her fur had settled into patterns she had never seen before, warm golds and soft blues that seemed to radiate contentment and hope rather than the chaotic stress responses that had characterized her displays in Imperial space. For the first time in her life, her changing colors were reflecting joy instead of fear. 6 months after her arrival on Earth, Zara stood before a gathering that would have been impossible in Imperial space. Representatives from 43 different worlds, many of them refugees like herself, assembled to plan something that could reshape the galaxy. The meeting was held in the community center's largest hall, its walls lined with artifacts from civilizations that had preserved their diversity despite Imperial pressure, or had rediscovered it after escaping Imperial control. Her fur had stabilized into patterns that still would have marked her as aberrant in Empire space, but which now felt natural and comfortable. The chaotic swirls of color had organized themselves into flows that reflected her emotional states without the violent shifts that had characterized her displays during times of stress. Living in a society that celebrated rather than feared her differences had allowed her biology to settle into healthier patterns. "The intelligence we've gathered over the past year is conclusive," she said, addressing the assembly in the lingua franca that had developed among the diverse refugee communities. A blend of human languages with elements from dozens of alien tongues that somehow managed to be both precise and poetic. "The Imperial genetic modification programs are failing." The announcement sent ripples of excitement through the gathered beings. Zara activated a holographic display that showed genetic analysis data collected from sources throughout Imperial space, information that had been painstakingly gathered by refugees who had maintained contacts within the Empire, and by human intelligence operations that had been monitoring Valari activities for decades. The modifications that eliminate genetic diversity also reduce fertility rates, immune system adaptability, and cognitive flexibility, she continued. Imperial populations are beginning to show signs of genetic bottlenecking that threaten their long-term survival. More importantly, the modifications are not as permanent as Imperial scientists claimed. She highlighted specific data points that showed her own case was not unique. Throughout Imperial space, beings were being born with traits that should have been eliminated by the modification programs. Most were being quietly eliminated through selective abortion or infanticide, but some were surviving and even reaching adulthood before being discovered. "We estimate that there are currently between 50 and 100 individuals scattered throughout Imperial space who show significant reversion to pre-modification genetic templates," Zara explained. "Most of them don't even know that others like them exist." Marcus Chen, who had become both her closest friend and her partner in this research, stood to address the assembly. "The question we face is whether we can reach these individuals before the Imperial authorities discover and eliminate them, and if we can reach them, whether we can offer them an alternative to exile or execution." The plan they had developed over the past months was audacious in scope and fraught with danger. Using intelligence networks that human refugees had maintained throughout Imperial space, they would attempt to identify and contact genetic reverts like Zara, providing them with information about the true nature of their condition and the alternatives that existed beyond Imperial borders. "It's not just about rescue," interjected Lyra Chantel, who had become a leader among the Valari refugee community. "It's about education." "If we can prove to Imperial citizens that their genetic modifications were not improvements but deliberate limitations, we might be able to spark a broader movement for change." The evidence they had compiled was devastating to Imperial doctrine. Zara's research, combined with historical data from the ancient listening post and genetic studies conducted by human scientists, showed that pre-modification Valari had been superior to their current population in almost every measurable way. They had been more creative, more adaptable, more emotionally sophisticated, and more capable of forming cooperative relationships with other species. "The great cleansing wasn't about improving our people," Zara said, her fur shifting to the deep purple patterns that appeared when she was presenting complex information. "It was about making us easier to control. The Empire's leadership eliminated the very traits that would have allowed our people to question authority or seek alternatives to rigid hierarchical structures." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human scientist who had been coordinating their research efforts, stood to present the biological evidence. What the Imperial modification programs accomplished was essentially the domestication of an entire species. Like the process humans used to turn wolves into dogs, the genetic changes eliminated independence, creativity, and adaptability in favor of compliance and predictability. The comparison sent shocked murmurs through the assembly. The idea that their own governments had essentially domesticated them like animals was profoundly disturbing to beings who had spent their entire lives believing in the superiority of their civilizations. "The good news," Dr. Vasquez continued, "is that domestication can be reversed. The genetic templates for pre-modification traits still exist within Imperial populations. They're just suppressed by artificial regulatory mechanisms. With proper treatment, it's possible to reactivate many of the suppressed characteristics. This revelation had been the most significant breakthrough of Zara's research. Working with human geneticists, she had discovered that her own chaotic pigmentation was just the most visible manifestation of a much broader genetic reversion. Her emotional range, creativity, and ability to form deep personal bonds were all expressions of reactivated pre-modification traits. We've developed protocols for safely reversing many of the Imperial modifications, Dr. Vasquez explained. The process isn't simple, and it requires the voluntary participation of the individuals involved, but it's possible to restore much of what was lost. The Assembly spent the next several hours discussing the practical challenges of implementing their plan. Contacting genetic reverts within Imperial space required sophisticated communication networks that could operate without detection by Imperial security forces. Providing them with accurate information about their condition and their options required resources that could be traced back to human territory if discovered. Most challenging of all, convincing Imperial citizens to question everything they had been taught about their society required overcoming 3 centuries of conditioning and propaganda. We're not talking about starting a war, Marcus emphasized as the discussion continued. We're talking about starting a conversation. The goal is to give people information and choices, not to impose our values on their societies. But those conversations could lead to civil conflicts, pointed out Commander Sarah Martinez, the human military liaison who had been assigned to assess the security implications of their plan. If significant numbers of Imperial citizens begin questioning their government's genetic policies, the response could be violent. The alternative is watching entire civilizations slowly die from genetic degradation, Zara replied. Imperial populations are already showing decreased fertility, increased susceptibility to disease, and reduced cognitive flexibility. If current trends continue, many Imperial worlds will face population collapse within the next century. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from different species and civilizations weighing in on the ethical, practical, and strategic considerations. Some argued for a gradual approach that would minimize the risk of violent backlash. Others insisted that the situation was too urgent for cautious measures. In the end, they reached a consensus that reflected the diversity of perspectives within the group. The plan would be implemented in phases, beginning with careful intelligence gathering and communication with the most promising contacts within Imperial space. As they learned more about conditions inside the Empire and the receptivity of potential allies, they would expand their efforts accordingly. Phase 1 will focus on the Outer Rim territories, Zara announced as they finalized their strategy. Imperial control is weaker there, and our intelligence suggests that genetic reversion rates are higher due to reduced enforcement of modification protocols. Lyra Chantel volunteered to lead the team that would make initial contact with suspected genetic reverts in her home region. I know those worlds, and I have contacts who might be willing to help. More importantly, I know how to communicate with people who have spent their entire lives believing that their differences make them inferior. The planning session concluded with the establishment of communication protocols, resource allocation schedules, and security measures designed to protect both the operatives and their contacts from Imperial retaliation. But perhaps most importantly, they established principles that would guide their efforts: voluntary participation, informed consent, and respect for the choices that individuals made about their own lives and societies. As the assembly dispersed and participants returned to their communities throughout human space, Zara remained behind with Marcus and a small group of coordinators to review the final details of Phase 1 operations. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Marcus asked as they walked through the community center's gardens in the late afternoon sunlight. "Once we begin active operations inside Imperial space, there's no guarantee we can protect you if your involvement is discovered." Zara's fur shifted to the warm golden blue patterns that had become her default display since learning to live without constant fear. "I've spent my entire life being told that I was broken, that my nature was a flaw that needed to be corrected or eliminated. Now I know that my differences are actually evidence of what our people could become if they were free to be themselves." She paused beside a fountain that had been designed by refugee artists from 17 different worlds, its flowing water creating patterns that somehow harmonized the aesthetic sensibilities of radically different species. "I can't change the past or undo the harm that the Imperial modifications have caused, but I can try to give others the choice that was taken from them." Marcus nodded, understanding the depths of her commitment to this cause. Over the months they had worked together, he had seen her transform from a frightened exile into someone who could serve as a bridge between 2 radically different ways of organizing civilization. "The humans have a saying," he told her as they continued their walk. "One person can't change the world, but one person can change one other person, who can change another, until eventually the whole world is different. Is that what you think we're doing? Changing the world. I think we're giving people the information they need to change themselves, Marcus replied. And sometimes that's how the most profound revolutions begin, not with violence or conquest, but with individuals discovering who they really are and choosing to live as their authentic selves. 3 weeks later, Zara received the message she had been both hoping for and dreading. Lyra's team had successfully made contact with a group of genetic reverts in the Outer Rim territories, and their response had exceeded all expectations. Not only were they eager to learn more about their condition and their options, but they had knowledge of others. A network of hidden communities throughout Imperial space where genetic diversity had been secretly preserved or was beginning to reassert itself. They want to meet with you, Lyra's message reported. They say they need to see someone like themselves who has found freedom, to know that what we're offering is real. The request meant returning to Imperial space, risking capture and execution to provide hope for others who were facing the same choices she had confronted. It meant leaving the safety and acceptance she had found on Earth to venture back into a civilization that considered her existence an abomination. But it also meant the possibility of sparking the kind of change that could transform the galaxy, not through conquest or force, but through the simple act of showing people that there were alternatives to the cages they had been taught to accept as natural. As Zara prepared for a journey that would either begin a new chapter in galactic history or end with her death, her fur settled into patterns she had never displayed before, deep crimsons and brilliant golds that spoke of courage, determination, and the kind of hope that could survive even in the darkest spaces between stars. She was no longer the frightened exile who had been cast into the void for the crime of being different. She was the herald of a revolution that would be fought not with weapons but with truth, not through conquest but through choice, not by eliminating diversity but by celebrating it. The galaxy was about to discover that the traits that rigid civilizations tried to eliminate, creativity, adaptability, emotional depth, and the courage to be different, were not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths that could reshape worlds. And it was all beginning with one individual who had learned that being different wasn't a curse, but a gift that could change everything.